Margaret Bloodgood Peeke was an American writer and theosophist. Born in Mechanicsville, New York State in 1838 as the daughter of Gary Marshall and Narcissa Peck. She taught in a New York private school, ran a private school herself in Irvington in New Jersey, was a newspaper editor, married Reverend George H. Peeke, and died at her summer home in Pomona in 1908. The legacy of Margaret B. Peeke, if it survives at all, is through her contribution to Hermetic philosophy. She appears to have been quite active in the field, and even taught courses with titles like Breath Prana and the Kingdoms of Consciousness and 8 lectures on the Yod Hevauher, the secrets of the Kabbalah. There is precious little I could find regarding her personal life, beside the fact that she left all her real estate property not to her husband but to her son E. Cornelius Peeke, while her husband only received $100. To quote Peeke herself, "show my good intention toward him." Of her sons, the only one on whom some information exists is Hewson L. Peeke, a lawyer in Sandusky, Ohio, who wrote 2 historical accounts of Erie County and also penned the 1917 History of American Drunkenness. In Americana Ebrietatis, the favourite tipple of our forefathers and the laws and customs relating thereto. As to the fiction work of Margaret B. Peeke, she appears to have penned 2 fiction titles, Today's Subject and her Xenia the Vestal. Born of Flame, a Rosicrucian Story, was first published in 1892. Unfortunately, it shares the flaws of many fictional works of the supernatural written by people who actually believed in spirits and spiritism and things of the sort. The book is barely a novel at all. There is some plot, but the majority of this book is taken up with characters having lengthy discussions on spiritualism, hermeticism, and trying to link these together with biblical dogma and geological evidence. And then the author would practically drop all pretenses at narrative fiction and sometimes fill up 3/4 of a page with extensive notes and quotations from spiritualist texts, sometimes seemingly with little or no segue between what is being voluminously explained on the page and the word or phrase of the novel which led to said diatribe by an asterisk. In an amusing gaffe, the author forgets the novel is supposed to take place in 1857 and has characters quote Hargrave Jennings's The Rosicrucians, which was first published in 1870, and even then have it referred to as an old book. Incidentally, those who unjustly rag on Bulwer Lytton for supposedly writing incredibly bad prose, see It Was a Dark and Stormy Night, etc., never read Jennings's line, "Note the goings of the fire, as he creepeth, serpentineth, riseth, slinketh, broadeneth," a line which Peeke actually quotes in the novel. If it seems like I'm stalling, that's because I am. There is almost nothing here. A doctor by the name of Grotius at an asylum falls in love with one of his patients and becomes violent whenever he's not near her. She dies and leaves him a bundle of papers inscribed by her father. Now after reading this, Dr. Grotius becomes melancholy and gives it to his friend, the skeptical mineralogist Dana, to read over. The inscribed bundle of tree bark details the life story of the father of Dr. Grotius's great love, a certain Bangilda. He relates how he met a woman from far India during a shipwreck, and how they married and then travelled to a rough, untamed part of America to build a house in the hills, but Van Gilda's house becomes a storehouse for smugglers who bribe him with precious minerals. Then, after some time, his wife, who constantly talks about some grand mystical enterprise she's been chosen to conduct, passes away and he is stricken with grief, but he is consoled by her spirit. Dr. Grotius decides to find the house, along with Dana, to help take the load off his mind, and while there he runs into a group of people led, as it turns out, by Elfrida, the cousin of Grotius's Clothilde, who is a great female mystic and constantly talks about concluding her aunt's work. Dana falls for her and nearly gets himself killed because Mrs. Van Gilda's ghost takes umbrage at people touching her books in her own room, even if it's just regular volumes of verse, to the point of routinely killing people who do so. The rest of the novel describes how Elfrida, her brother, friend, the latter two of whom pair off in a sort of blinking-you-miss-it way which never really comes much into play, and Dana to travel to a town of black people where Peeke can wax lyrical about southern hospitality. Have a white lawyer be sort of racist towards black people by implying slavery made them lazy, and Dana falling for Elfrida as well, and this also literally leads to nothing except him and his senator friend going on about what an absolutely flawless goddess she is. I would almost think this was a self-insert of the writer given her deep and lengthy musings on Rosicrucianism and Hermeticism, While in the town they find the bones of a pygmy people who are said to be the first human species to have possessed a spirit, as opposed to the so-called mound builders who didn't because something about them being brainless and who chased and hunted the pygmies violently. Then, after they find a tomb with a bunch of pygmies and a sacred inscribed moon rock to match one they found at the house and one Elfrida saw in India, they return back to the Van Gilde house where, out of nowhere, Grotius decides to take some of the preserved pygmy brains and have it inserted into the neck of an infant so that it will regress in evolution and or develop regressive degenerations or defects to prove something about evolution, I guess. This is such an out-of-nowhere moment, and it's over in a sentence or two, so you have no idea what just happened. The novel ends with a fire tree, quote-unquote, planted by a mystic in the back garden of the house exploding, Dr. Grotius willingly dying to join his beloved Clothilde, and the entire house sinking into a sinkhole in the ground. Mixed between all of this are statements about how humanity was basically designed to evolve into modern man by some type of moon spirits called Pitris. How Darwin is a stupid face because he believes we evolved from apes as opposed from pygmies, how the 7 planets of our solar system, 7, and 7 sections of a human heart are all connected to mystical number 7 because mystical mysticism. Oh, and there's a psychic black girl who can summon birds, but she's in the story for like 3 pages and ends up as the housemaid in Elfrida and Dana's house. And if it seems like that was actually a decent length of plot boiled down, it's a bunch of people going to a house, finding a ghost and scroll there, going to a place to dig up bones and then coming back. All while never shutting up about moon spirits and soul transference and the sanctity of fire, which is really a shame because the essential outline of the novel is kind of screw-brained and interesting, but it's just not very well put together.